What's up, y'all? You are listening to Chain Reaction. I am one of your hosts, Jeremiah. Thanks a lot for joining us today. And I am joined, as usual, by Mr. Jeremiah Harding. What's up, man? How's it going?
Not much. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. It's a beautiful day. Had a great weekend. Just hanging out with the wife and kid mostly. Nothing too special. Grocery shopping. I don't know if that's really a Memorial Day weekend activity that people converse about, but
Well, it depends on what you shot for.
everyday food, lots of vegetables.
No ribs, nothing American.
No ribs. I try to stay away from celebrating Memorial Day. It's obviously a huge tragedy, but people treat it as a time to make it seem like it's a noble thing to join the military. I try to stay away from that bullshit as much as possible. I am currently roasting corned beef for Rubens. I don't know if that is American or counts, but that's kind of German, I suppose.
Well,
sauerkraut and stuff.
Rubens are an all-season sort of food. There's no time when Rubens aren't good. But I sort of use Memorial Day as a time to bring up the fact that the military is commoditized and that it's not there to defend our freedom. Because if you look at it, people aren't celebrating Memorial Day to say, salute the troops, support the troops, whatever. They're celebrating the discounts they got at the store. And to me, that's the perfect moment to describe to people how fucked the system is. Because it's like, well, you say you care, you say you're supporting the troops, but do you really? Is that really what you like Memorial Day for, or is it the deep discount you got on your washer?
And what do people mean by support the troops? They usually mean criticize those that say we should keep the troops out of foreign wars. It's ridiculous.
Well, and by support the troops, they clearly don't mean bring them back out of unnecessary foreign conflicts for the profit of the ruling elite. They mean throw them back in there into the meat grinder that they all actually hate, and don't support any candidates that want to remove them from those regions, like Ron Paul, like the guy who had the most active duty veterans supporting him. That's what they mean. They don't mean support the troops by keeping them alive, healthy, and sane. They mean support the troops by throwing them into conflict constantly so that their emotions and mentalities are battered every second of every day. That's support. Well, I guess we know why domestic violence is so high.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons for that. Supporting the troops means continue to engage in these religious statist rituals that encourage people to treat the troops as some sort of almost God, some sort of superhuman heroes out there sacrificing their lives so that the U.S. population can be free. I do not hear people talk about freedom as much anymore in the context of troop stuff. It still happens once in a while, but I think it's become just so obviously false. It's whenever we see the military budget go up, it's possible there's an exception, but I don't believe there is. Whenever the military budget goes up, it is always in conjunction with a corresponding decrease in freedoms in the U.S., which you'd expect to see the complete inverse relationship. Were they fighting for freedom? I don't even know that. I don't know many people that use it as an argument anymore.
Well, every bit of government spending, it reduces American freedom because it reduces the purchasing power of your labor. You can't, for all of these socialists who support, Workers' Day, which is like International Workers' Day, which is like May 1st, May Day. For all of these people that support that celebrate that, it's sort of like the same thing. Instead of supporting the troops, instead of supporting the workers, by removing the government situations that make it worse for them, let's throw them into the constant grinder in the same sort of way. Let's let's treat the worker as a commodity in the same sort of way to push forward our political agendas and get those elected who gave us a good deal of money and promised us things in their districts. You know, let's commoditize the worker and make it seem like they couldn't purchase fucking anything without the government.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, everyone is considered a tool insofar as it can be used to further government policy. You know, the labor worker is a tool for propaganda in a similar way that the troops are, where they use them, and everyone has we've talked about this before, but everyone has a kid or a friend or an uncle or someone close to them that served in the military, and that makes them an excellent personalized prop to hide the foolishness and the evil of the rulers who are sending these troops into combat. Because when you tie whether or not a war is just with whether or not you support this particular person, which you obviously support, then you're able to make people feel obligated and feel obligated to support the troops and thus support the same policy, or ashamed if they don't.
Yeah, and that then they just make sure there are enough domestic policies, like the war on drugs, for instance, or the war on poverty or whatever, that they can consistently recycle the troops into a new troop position and have a giant militarized police force. Where instead of shooting terrorists, they're now shooting civilians here at home. Yeah. Instead of shooting civilians overseas, they're now shooting civilians here at home. It's all about churning them through. It's all about keeping the tools that you developed so that you can use them again in a different way. It's reduce, reuse, recycle. Doesn't matter. They're not humans. They're toys.
Yeah. Yeah, if they're not members of the ruling class, they are subhuman creatures. For sure.
Yep.
Well, Trump recently got back from his foreign, I don't know, what do you call it, tour of countries in the Middle East, which I don't want to talk much about this, but there's just a few things. One was like an image of, it was an image of things you shouldn't do in Saudi Arabia, and because people there find it offensive. And one of them was a thumbs up. And then there, right next to that, there was an image of Trump with a few people in turbans in Saudi Arabia giving a big old thumbs up. I did not check the veracity of the story or whether or not the picture was real, or even whether or not that is something that's considered rude there. But I wouldn't be surprised if that is 100% what occurred. And then Trump went to Israel after being in Saudi Arabia, and he said there, I just got back from the Middle East, which is what I love about Trump. This is the best thing about Trump, is he is a big enough, I don't know if it's the best thing, it's one of my favorite things. He is such a buffoon that he almost gives the office of the president the respect and dignity it deserves. Like, few other presidents have been ridiculous enough to treat it with so little respect and dignity.
Well, because this is where my tinfoil comes in. I see it as though if we can say he's stupid, we can say that what he's doing is a series of blunders rather than a series of calculated decisions that the elites wanted him to make. So, I mean, I can see where that would be enjoyable, but I can't enjoy it in the same way.
Because you assume that his blunders are a part of a plan?
Well, I mean, okay, let's say that it's insulting to thumbs up in the Middle East, right? Let's say that that's true, 100%, and that he thumbs up in the Middle East, if that's a verb anyway, that I can past conjugate.
That works.
Let's say that's true. It's no different from Le Pen not wearing a hijab.
You think so? I don't know. One is not doing something, and one is actively doing something. I mean,
Well,
I
she
assume
canceled
that
the meeting.
Trump
She
doesn't know.
canceled the meeting though. Like if Trump knew that thumbing up was something that they wouldn't allow people to do, but that's an American custom, then he might be doing the elites favors for them by doing this thing that's rude because like sort of like an uncovered woman because it's asserting the first world. It's asserting the first world exceptionalism that allows the American military to be overseas in the first place.
Yeah, but he also does stuff that looks pretty damn subservient. You know, and
Well,
I understand
absolutely.
it's just for show. I mean, when you go to the Saudis and you give them a $110 billion weapons deal, which fantastically will help create jobs in the U.S., and then visit Israel and talk so positively about Israel, um, I'm sure, I'm really hoping that a lot of Trump voters are finally becoming disillusioned with this political process because
A lot of them,
damn,
yeah.
he is doing the exact opposite in so many ways of what he said he was going to do, which is politics as usual, but that's exactly what they were voting against. I know some
Well,
still
yeah.
think this is just a part of brilliant Trump's master plan to complete or do his policies and do the things he said he was going to do. He's just got to, play a little politics and make it happen. But I think that's an incredible pipe dream that is becoming more and more. It looks ever more false the longer we go on, and it's only been 100 and some days. There's no there's
Well, it's 18th dimensional Chinese checkers.
18th dimensional Chinese checkers. He's really playing the complicated long game that is so complex and so subversive and subtle that it in the end it will look just like every other politician. But in fact, I'm sure it will be completely different. He'll have radically changed America.
Well, every it's like that old limerick. Oh, what a tangled web we weave when we practice to deceive. And when there's tons and tons of lies built on lies that you have to constantly support, um, then every president remaining and every president in the future will consistently have to lie more in order to maintain the system.
Yeah, yeah. I'm hoping they will. That's actually like the positive sort of view. I think I'm hoping they'll have to lie. But what we've found, sadly, is that even when these lies are exposed, and even when they don't lie, even when we see them telling the truth in, for example, emails that were exposed, people are still cool with it. Like, even when they're honest about a lot of the horrific things that they're engaged in. The media, certainly, and the population at large kind of just focuses on a completely different narrative and ignores reality. I think the
Well, yeah, but that's
numbers of us are increasing who care about the truth, but there's still such a vast group of people that doesn't give a fuck.
well, but that's the idiocracy kind of thing. The stupid sheep are outbreeding the intelligent people, and even if there are many more of us that understand and have our eyes opened, there's still going to be many people who are trying to outpace us actively,
Yeah,
because we're going against the norm.
or it's maybe the result of increasing the number of people who go to college over the last few decades. And it seems like a lot of the people who are most ignorant are the ones who think that they're the most knowledgeable and intelligent because they have succeeded in their academics. Oh, we have an internet connection problem? I think we'll be okay. It's probably on your end. You hear me, Harding?
Well, yeah,
Okay,
I
good.
hear you right now.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to we talked about discussing this last week, and we never got to it. We were talking about having a little bit of a discussion on religion and the state and government, and I think it would be. I think I would like to start just hearing some of your thoughts on it as an atheist.
Well, and I used to be a Christian, but the idea of government is an invisible entity that you can't prove exists, um, and its emissaries, which are certainly not acting as priests, um, do like wishing for things on behalf of this invisible, unprovable entity, and sometimes getting them. And whenever they get them, they celebrate it. And whenever they don't get it, it's just part of the plan. And if that's not religion, I don't know what is. But then there's also the idea of dependency. Well, without God, how would we have morality? Without government, how would we have rules? You know, without government, how would we provide for X? Without sacrificing to the volcano demon, how would we ever get a good harvest the next year? You know, it's the parallels are so direct that everything you hear from government, whether it be the promises from a politician who just acts as a priest for the government, or the ideas and attitudes of the various sects of that religion, which are Republican and Democrat, of course, you always get people who encourage sectarian violence. Stomp my flag, I'll stomp your ass. Burning crosses, burning flags, whatever it is. And you get people who are fighting each other over the best application of government, the best application of their religion, in the same way that they've been fighting over the best application of Islam or Christianity or Hinduism or even Buddhism. You get people fighting constantly in all of these contexts, in various religions. And the one people don't talk about is government, because obviously those people are real. Well, you can't point to government. The only thing you can point to is people who claim that they have certain abilities and rights and responsibilities because they're government. And that's certainly not pointing to a thing. That's pointing to a claimant idea. And, astounding claims require astounding evidence, and nobody's still provided any evidence that government even exists, much less is there to protect us or for any good reason.
Interesting. I thought you would go a different route with it. Yeah, I mean, I would say that the difference between government and God is that government doesn't exist. And that's not saying that God does, but just that I think you can actually show that it is non-existent at all in terms of, yeah, like it's just an idea, and there's not evidence that I'm aware of government's existence. I thought you talk more about like church structure and religious structure, so that's interesting. Yeah, it seems that for many, God has become their government. I mean, a lot of people have given up on traditional religion and have taken that faith and hope and longings for unmet desires and place them in the state. If they can just get the state to do what they want, then the world will be a miraculous place to live, and then their lives will be full, and then the demons of the other side will be vanquished.
Yeah, well, and if you want to talk church structure, you get one leader at the front who collects the money and who has an organization of people below him who decide how to spend the money, and all of this money is collected from the people in the audience, from the people in the pews, and they all decide how much money they're willing to give, but there's a set minimum that's universally decided. in almost every church, in almost every bit of organized religion. And when these people give this money, they're giving it because the church, quote, needs it, even though oftentimes churches have some of the most overpaid staff in the world. You know,
A handful
but
do.
yeah,
A handful.
yeah. Well, and like, but then there's like the idea that you go to the polls and you vote, and it's basically prayer. You're basically saying, I can't see you, but I know you're there. Are you there, Trump? It's me, Margaret. And you get your side maybe, but if you don't get your side, it's just because of a mysterious way that things worked, and you know it's basically religion.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. That's basically religion. I think our church experiences have been dramatically different. I don't know. I know a lot of pastors in poverty.
I do
But
too. I'm not saying they
yeah.
all are. I'm saying that a good deal of them are. Certainly the most successful, and the larger a church becomes, the larger a government becomes, the more money it's going to, quote, need, because it's large, because it's not decentralized.
Yeah. Yeah, and I started questioning or caring about and trying to I think undermine, I don't know if that's the right word, at least speak against the authority structures in churches that are so common and overwhelming for people long before I even really kn- knew what a libertarian was. So that's something that's been I suppose that's kind of a personality characteristic I have, but it's amazing how dramatically different the church structure is today compared to what it was, what we see in the first century. In the letters and what we see Jesus doing, just how it has become very formal and very hierarchical, and almost it places people above another in various roles. Whereas, like in the first century, it met in people's homes. It was ecclesia was the word for a church. It literally means gathering. It's just people getting together to engage with one another, and people had different roles based upon their skill sets. But it was an environment where everyone would have some time to talk if they so desired, and the people who were better at teaching and better at sharing various words and singing would do more of that in the community. It was much more, I don't know if organic's the right word, relational and intimate rather than structural. And then we see, the Jewish religion, it also has the hierarchy built into it. And Jesus going around where his main enemies, if you want to call them that, the main people he speaks out against are the people that are a part of that religious hierarchy. Those are the ones who are most likely to oppose him because they see him as a threat to their authority structure. It's pretty interesting that the churches that, Jesus following churches have become some of the very hierarchical structures that sometimes abuse people and often use people and manipulate them and take advantage of them, just like the structures that Jesus was opposing in his time, and just like the very people who saw him as a threat.
Well, you know, so what I like, if you want to talk Christianity specifically, I like the idea of a church without walls, where you're going out and delivering the message everywhere. But if you compare that directly to what the U.S. government is doing, you know, especially the U.S., they've basically done the same thing that televangelists have done for a very long time, and they've automated and mechanized much of the process. call me and text whatever to this number to donate a certain amount to this church. You can vote by your phone now. The idea of organized religion is the same sort of thing as the idea of government in that sort of way.
Yeah,
Because
the way it is
it's
organized matters too.
Yeah.
I mean, because some people just criticize organized religion, but I don't know if that's the right word. I think it's the hierarchical, structured religion that's problematic. I'm not sure what the best term is for it, but I mean, lots of people engage in organized gatherings of various sorts, which are not problematic in that same way.
Well, that's what the Church Without Walls attempted to do, which like the movement in general, because there's also specific, like, I guess, branded churches that are Church Without Walls.
Okay.
But the general idea was to not go to a specific church, to make your mission field everywhere. And I think that's the answer to government in general, is to decentralize things. Because if you have a government service, let's say protection, right?
Yes.
Community watch, then it's there because people don't think they can get it without that centralized institution. If you can make decentralized institutions, then you can prove to people very easily that the centralization wasn't necessary to begin with.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the centralized authority structure it's incredibly inefficient. It doesn't meet individual needs and desires very well. But it is easy. Like the government and big churches are just really easy for people to go to, relate with people under these structures. I mean, it's nice. I wish I were a statist, not really, but I wish I were, just so I didn't have to take responsibility for anything. That's one of the nicest parts about government. You can just say, "Oh, look, there are some poor people over there. I will tell the government I want them to help them. Oh, look, there are bad people over there. I will tell the government to take care of it. I will tell the government to give people health care." It just gives you this one sort of solution to everything. It doesn't actually solve problems, but you can pretend like you're doing something just by saying that you think the government should take care of it. And it's similar with churches, where if you go to like a big church with a great stage performance on a Sunday, it's easy to slip in, slip out, hear some guy talk for a bit, throw a few dimes your way and be like, "Oh, I'm a good person and I'm really following Jesus well because I showed up to this building for an hour and a half." I think they have a similar appeal, a centralized government and a large church. A similar appeal in that way.
Yeah, I can agree. And well, also then there's the idea that if you can divest that sort of responsibility for long enough, then people will be crippled, so that they don't think they can operate in the same way without that. Jesus walked for fucking miles in order to deliver his message, but many people won't even walk like down the block to help their neighbor. They'll wait for the church to do it, and they'll say, "Well, go to the church. They'll deal with all your problems," or whatever.
Yeah.
And instead of going out there and actually helping people, instead of going out there and actually doing something about it, plenty of people will just, like, "In God we trust, in government we trust," just pray a little harder, vote harder. It'll happen next time, we promise.
Yeah,
and then
which is completely sorry. Keep going.
Go ahead.
I was just that attitude is, like you were saying, I think, is completely oppositional to the words and the ways of Jesus. It was, yeah, pray, yeah, talk to God, yeah, relate with one another and talk about these texts and what they mean for your life. But also, he says, "I am among you as one who serves." That faith is about, at least partially about what you do. It's about being faithful to the God that you claim to follow. And being faithful involves actions, not just having some beliefs. The one author in the New Testament says that faith without works is dead. He's like, even demons believe in God. There's nothing honorable about that if you're not showing love to your neighbor, and specifically the poor and less fortunate in the world.
Yeah, and that's why Jesus got so pissed off at the money changers, because they were making religion about exchange of money and hierarchical control to maintain that exchange, rather
Yes.
than they were about anything personal, about anything that could actually make the world better from an individual level to the top.
Yeah, and we know from other sources that a lot of these exchanges that they do, because the priests had authority to decide whether or not an animal was suitable to be sacrificed. So if people went and brought their own animal to the temple to sacrifice it, the people there could say, "Oh, this one isn't good enough, so you have to buy one of ours." And what they would often do is say that, make these people buy these other animals of theirs at a much higher cost than it would normally be for them, and then turn around and sell that same animal that they exchanged to someone else for a higher cost. So like people would bring a dove and they'd say, "Well, we'll take your dove and then you give us some money and we'll give you this other dove." And then they take the dove that they got from those other people and turn around and sell it to another person while they do the same thing. It was a money-making scam. Fraud, really.
Yeah. And of course that's what the US government does as well,
Yes.
because the money that they have is worthless. So the only thing they're doing is exchanging it before, like, they're exchanging the interest by way of taxation before the average person is hit by that. Like their private board of, and this is just the US government, but pretty much all countries with a central bank do the same thing. They create loans to create money.
Yeah.
And all of these loans have interest. That interest is paid off by tax dollars, and it's paid off directly to the stockholders who run the Fed. And those stockholders are connected to the most wealthy financial institutions, and they get what they need before everybody else does. And nobody knows about it. They don't know about the theft that's going on, the taxation that not only is theft but promotes an environment and structure of theft as well, because it basically delegates responsibility for repayment of all of these loans to future generations. And that's essentially what these people were doing in that temple too, because they were creating an economy that ripped everybody off, and they were saying this is the only way society can function, and if you disagree, you're breaking the law.
Yeah. The example I was thinking of is a little more explicit, where under FDR they went around and they made people sell them gold, and they bought gold from the people. And then because, they needed gold, obviously, then they turned around, sold the gold to Europe, made a profit, then went off the gold standard. It was a pretty big scam. So obvious, such an obviously blatant power grab, money grab by people. But, FDR is the greatest president. I mean, few people have done more under their time as president to ruin the U.S. economically, but him. But
Yeah, well,
Great Depression.
And what's great about the FDR presidency is that it's a lie. The whole thing is a fucking lie. Not that he was president. I'm not like that level of tinfoil, but the whole thing was a lie, because every policy that he did only expanded the government, and it was all part of the plan. Harding actually started to try to reduce the size of government and the scope and power and all that. And like the Great Depression of 1929 was prevented because he stepped in, you know, and but that's not
Wait,
something you're told about.
What are you saying? You said the Great Depression was prevented.
Well, there was going to be a depression
There
during
was.
Harding's presidency, and he prevented it by reducing the size of government. That's
when,
what the Roaring. And I said
you mean 1920 or 1919 or 1921?
Yeah, 1919. I said 1929 instead of 1919.
Yeah, I know. It was one of those years around there. Yep. He didn't really do anything. After a year, the economy had already more than recovered.
Well, he did a ton though. He reduced the size of government.
Yeah, I don't remember that. I thought it was nothing, but regardless, the economy found bottom and then moved up from there. I'm not doubting that he reduced the size of government. I just haven't read about that. But when you don't have government intervention, then the market can correct what's going on, figure out what things are actually worth to people, and move and build from there.
Well, and if you look up, I believe it was Tom Woods who wrote this, the Depression You've Never Heard Of. It was either Tom Woods or it was Bob Murphy, one of the two. And if you look up that, and if you also look up Great Myths of the Great Depression, can't remember who wrote that, but both of those are great reads. They're basically essays, and you can read them. I think you can find both of them on Mises or the Foundation for Economic Education, and those are great reads to figure out how the U.S. government created all of the problems and then claimed that they solved them and therefore saved the economy.
Yeah, it's a wonderful little scam they got going on. Oh, look at this problem. Oh, look, we're fixing it. And they do the same thing with the economy and healthcare and terrorism, war. I mean, they really pretty much do it in every area. Poverty. They're always intervening, creating problems, and then saying, look, we're the solution. We got this, guys. Again, it goes back to, I think at least in part, the ease of saying, oh, government will do it. Well, they have to do something. No. If you're causing the problem, doing more is probably not going to be helpful, especially not when it's doubling down on the cause. Hopefully the housing market.
Cause is always
fingers crossed.
Centralization, and the cause is always centralization. Like when you get that mentality that we're the only ones who can do X, then there will be plenty of plenty of Y happening. And nobody will ever solve for anything else. Nobody will ever try that. And whenever anybody does, they'll be considered to be part of the problem.
Yeah. Oh, it's in relation to government and religion. One of the things that I think the Great Depression made people feel vulnerable, and it made people actually quite vulnerable in their life. When that feeling of vulnerability and desperation is something that the government preys on, that and fear. And religions of all, at least a lot of different religions, use that exact same desperation. And when I say a lot of different religions, I mean people as representatives of these religions use desperation and vulnerability as a way to control others, to get them to do what they want in a way that they think benefits them. Next to government, I mean, the abuse of people. Abuse is a strong word because it's not the initiation of force, but the using and manipulation of people with religion and with their beliefs and the preying upon them. One of the things that bothers me most. It's
especially when you can create that desperation. Like a lot of you want to talk organized religion. A lot of churches I've seen, not necessarily all of them, not necessarily most of them, but a lot of churches I've seen will intentionally misrepresent a Bible verse to make the situation, whatever that is, seem dire enough that somebody better damn well give more money.
I mean, honestly, from my perspective, I have no sort of authority on this topic, but from my perspective, most churches aren't really that interested in the Bible at all.
Of
I mean,
course not. The Bible's not profitable.
their interest is very superficial at best. I mean, so many sermons I've heard, or whatever you want to call them, have been just people saying what they want to say and then finding some verses here and there and stories here and there that seem to corroborate what they wanted to tell people already, which I have no problem. I mean, motivational speeches and teaching people things about human interaction or whatever, like that has value in and of itself, potentially, depending upon how it's done and how insightful you are. But like, then just, if you want to do that, then just do that. But don't go around and pretend like this is what the Bible is trying to say. Like, actually, I mean, it's a complicated book. Like, but if you claim to believe it, or at least find it useful for teaching people, then deal with it as it is, and on its own terms, really.
Well, I mean, because not to break too much from the government is religion thing, but
Yeah.
like, if you want the truth, that's because a lot of pastors are entertainers, and it's hard to fill an hour. I mean, we can do
Yeah.
it because we're doing plenty of shit and we're sort of speaking off the cuff. But if you're trying to go, chapter by chapter, verse by verse, and if you're trying to like, you know, cover the whole Bible in a year or a significant portion of the
Yeah.
Bible in a year, there's a lot of padding you might have to do, especially since an hour, an hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on the church you go to, it's basically like entertainment for a lot of people. They're going there to get a product, that being what the pastor has to say about whatever, um, and they don't really care about how much money they're giving to it, as long as the pastor affirms what they're thinking, which is that the world is terrible and it's because of Satan. So here's like 100 reasons why, maybe 60 of which are affiliated with a Bible verse. And it's that sort of padding that creates a lot of the confusion that exists in organized religion, especially Christianity and Islam.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was like, that structure that of the church is at least partially tied to the mixing of church and state in 300 under Constantine, where Christianity was such a growing religion in the Roman Empire that it became something that was outlawed to something that became the legal religion of the empire. I mean, some people say Constantine converted. I tend to think he found it politically expedient to convert to Christianity so then he could throw crosses on his war banners and put people in jail for totally different reasons than they were earlier. And then that strain became it then became used as a tool of the state. And there's always been various groups that are much more, even denominations that are much more questioning of authority and much more skeptical of both governments and their wielding of the sword and of authority structures within the church. But the mainstream Christianity at the time became very much something that was useful for governments to justify their existence and to train people to be obedient. Like we were talking about, the structure of a church is like the structure of a school and the structure of many homes. It's a kind of in many ways what the government wants people to be trained to do. Obey orders, do what I say, listen to authority, trust the people that are over you in these various organizations. If you don't ask questions and be mostly like everyone else in your group and don't make trouble, I feel like there's similar expectations in kind of all of the family structure and school and the church.
Well, I mean, school specifically is completely designed for indoctrination.
Right.
It has been from its start. The word we get school from is Schule, and it's the Prussian school system designed to um, teach kids obedience to the state. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, and these other things I think are just useful elements that are a part of culture, and how much they're caused by government. I don't really know. I mean, I tend to think, and I'm not a historical expert, but I tend to think that the Catholic Church and they have probably the strongest hierarchy structure and authority structure, most most organized, with the greatest amount of power at the top, and all the levels below. They I tend to think that they're a product of the church's mixing with state in the 300s, and the Protestant church came out of the Catholic church. And while they had a lot of things that were different, and there was a lot of subverting and a greater focus on the importance of individuals, and a greater focus on or a greater questioning of the hierarchy. They still modeled the Catholic Church. They are still a very, very similar model of what the Catholic Church does, even with just having, when I think they call it a homily or whatever in the Catholic Church. When you have one person doing that, or a couple people doing that week after week after week, you are implicitly training people to simply listen to these authorities.
Well, you want to talk that. I brought it up because it's interesting, and everybody who's interested in this subject should read all 95 of them. But Martin Luther's 95 Theses, 1 to 10, apply here specifically. So I'll read them.
All right.
When our Lord and Master Jesus Christ said repent, he willed the entire life of believers to be one of repentance. This word cannot be understood as referring to the sacrament of penance, that is, confession and satisfaction, as administered by clergy. Yet it does not mean solely inner repentance. Such inner repentance is worthless unless it produces various outward mortification of the flesh. The penalty of sin remains as long as the hatred of self, that is, true inner repentance, namely till our entrance into the kingdom of heaven. The Pope neither desires nor is able to remit any penalties except those imposed by his own authority or that of the canons. The Pope cannot remit any guilt except by declaring and showing that it has been remitted by God, or, to be sure, by remitting guilt in cases reserved to his judgment. If his right to grant remission in these cases were disregarded, the guilt would certainly remain unforgiven. God remits guilt to no one unless at the same time he humbles him in all things and makes him submissive to the vicar, the priest. The penitential canons are imposed only on the living, and according to the canons themselves, nothing should be imposed on the dying. Therefore, the Holy Spirit, through the Pope, is kind to us insofar as the Pope, in his decrees, always makes exception of the article of death and of necessity. Those priests act ignorantly and wickedly who, in the case of the dying, reserve canonical penalties for purgatory. Now, there's a lot there, meaning basically not only can the Pope not forgive anything, only God can, which was something that was unheard of at the time, but he can't treat anyone in any other sort of way than God would want them to be treated, and still be acting in the authority granted to him theoretically by God. And, this went on to form the Protestant movement. So, the idea that you can criticize organized religion and maybe have this sort of effect is something that has been lost on time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I want to just say, organized religion is fine in general. I can hate it and still talk about it in a negative way, or hierarchically organized religion. But as long as people aren't initiating force, it's obviously something that's consistent with a free society. The problem with religion is the same as the problem with government, is that it often is correlated with statism. That is the moral justification of aggression. I mean, some people like to use the word government to describe rights enforcement agencies, which I'm not my preferred term, but I mean some authors in the past use it too. We talk about free governments, but not a problem as long as it isn't combined with the justification of aggression. But religion, government, Martin Luther, Harding. I forgot what I was going to say next.
Well, you were talking about criticizing organized religion without necessarily having to hate it. That was where you started this.
Yeah, without having to outlaw it. As long as it's not an initiating force, like it should be perfectly legal. But I think some of the same training that the state uses and the same sort of the organization, I think some of the same training the state uses helps keep religion as it looks like in churches right now in place. I think that if people were living in a free society, they would be less likely to defer to the authority of church leaders as well. Maybe not, but I think people would be generally more skeptical of anyone kind of claiming this position over others.
Very likely, but because that's the thing. Like, when people start, if we ever get a stateless society, it will be because there are enough people rejecting organized religion of government.
Yes.
That they start to reject things in general. Because if you oppose, Trump or Obama, then you might still support government in general because you support Raytheon, or because you support, Nestle, or because you support XYZ, whatever those things be, because they're all connected. And so but if we had a society that was truly stateless, I think it would be because enough people had enough understanding of this sort of thing that they could function properly in that sort of society without supporting anything associated with it, which, of course, part of that would be the sort of corrupt institutions of organized religion, because those institutions are corrupt primarily because of what they can gain from this collectivist society because of that. And that, that's hope, because that means that if we stop being so mindless, and if we stop sort of delegating responsibility for our actions to other parties, especially those unborn, that we will someday lay with a number that we can track them by and make sure that we can control them with, then perhaps we can also say goodbye to the days where religion manipulated and controlled people as much as it does now. There will always be that, of course, but the idea of organized religion will also be fading in a much more critical population, at least as it stands now.
Yeah. I think there will always be some of that. I mean, if people want to show up to a place for 2 hours a week, throw some money people's way, sing a couple songs, feel good about themselves for all week until the next time they go, I might call them out on that being kind of a stupid reason to feel good about yourself. But as long as you're not supporting the initiation of force, we're good, man. We're fine. Could be a lot worse.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and of course, if we ever get this society and religion still exists in the same sort of way it does now, and a lot of these statist churches don't die with it, like Jeremiah Wright, for instance, who is not a good person, or the Westboro Baptist Church, or whatever, or all of these institutions that use religion as the way to keep people in line, the entire Islamic caliphate. If we ever get that society, then religion will have its rightful place as a personal decision to live a better life, instead of as a way to manipulate society for your own benefit. And I think that is a fucking beautiful goal.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely eliminating forms of preying upon people's emotions and desires and vulnerabilities and also delusions that they were taught from childhood is an important part of improving the world. I just it just takes such a huge backseat for me right now till we get rid of this giant structure known as the state. You know, that is a monstrous evil. The other one's just kind of like a baby evil. For now, at least it's still
considering the
technically
fact that
voluntary, but also built off. A lot of it is built off, I think, some manipulation and deception of children, which is a pretty disgusting thing.
Yeah, well, and that's why I believe no religion should be imparted on anybody until they're old enough to understand it, including government. You know, I won't be telling my kids about anything other than basic philosophical principles. Whenever I find that special woman, I won't be telling my children about anything other than basic philosophical principles until they're like old enough to truly understand them, whatever that age is, because it differs with like from child to child. And then I'll let them make their own decisions. You know, they can be a Christian, they can be a Republican, a Democrat, an evil anarchist like me. You know, and they can make their own decisions based on their own understanding of the world as they see it.
It is a funny thing to call anarchists evil in contrast with Democrats and Republicans.
Well,
yeah, I do think there's a way of teaching
society,
kids. I'm sorry, interrupted you.
I just said I'm fine with saying I want to uproot society, though.
Yeah, I don't say uproot society. I don't think. I don't know. It depends on how we define society. We're not going to get into the conversation. I was going to say, I think there is a way to teach kids things and expose kids to things that isn't manipulative or controlling, and that meets them kind of in their lack of understanding. Because I mean, kids, one of the most important things, in my opinion, to teach kids early on is that adults don't know shit either. They just think they do, and you're programmed to think they do, and they always try to come across to kids like they know everything because they're the boss. But I mean, that was like a really important revelation for me as a kid that I wish I would have heard way sooner, or learned way sooner, or saw for myself way sooner, that these guys do make a bunch of dumb decisions all the time. And what they are trying to impose on me is often stupid. So I think that helps. Being exposed to that idea early helps kids keep an open mind about all the ideas they hear from everyone, including and even especially me. You know, I hope my kid is very skeptical. Maybe he won't be skeptical at all. I don't know. He's a fucking blast right now, though.
That sounds good, though. Sounds like you're gonna make a great parent.
I hope so. You know, I feel like I'm never going to evaluate whether or not I'm a great parent. I hope that he is grateful that he has me as his dad, you know? I'll let him do that. Defer that evaluation to him. Let's get out of here. Any final thoughts?
Listen to Moment of Rage. Follow me on Twitter at Insanity is Free. Fuck the system and smash the state.
That works. If you want to follow me on Twitter, at JeremiahJM, also at Chain Reaction, the T is a 1. My personal feed is full of basically nonsense, Jesus, and anti-statism, whereas the Chain Reaction is pretty much just exclusively anti-state. If you want to hear me ramble for 5 to 10 minutes, almost weekly about parenting and what it's like to parent a baby and parenting in a respectful way, you can go to daddydiatribes.wordpress.com. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed some of this conversation, or at least made your day a little bit more interesting. I hope you have a great week and really enjoy yourself and learn something new and make progress on whatever your goals are in this life. All right. We're out. Peace.